Hey guys, welcome to that Florida Feeling. How is everybody today? I hope everybody's had a good week. It's finally getting warm. Um, I'm glad. Although we are in a drought. A lot of Florida's actually in a burn ban. Not surprised. Also, not surprised people are still having bonfires. And every now and then you'll see a brush fire pop up. Not surprised about any of that. I just hope for rain anytime soon. I know the rainy season's not here yet. We still have a couple months. But anything would be nice right about now. Other than that, I hope everybody's had a good week. I know we're almost into May. I can't believe we're almost into May. It does not feel like 4 months of this year have gone by. Seems too fast. I mean, January took a whole 3 years in itself, and then the rest has just flown by. But here we are. Hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode about the lost town of Mangonia. I actually got some interesting comments about it. I think it's really interesting how Florida has some really cool history, and some of it we preserve, and some of it we have to kind of go back and be like, do you want to remember this or not? And I think it's cool that those people decided to remember that particular part, especially because of the mango trees. So today we're going to talk about another piece of Florida history, not exactly a good one. And if you've ever driven to Panama City, down 231, you've probably driven past the place where this happened. And I know I have. I used to drive every time I'd have to come to Panama City, or when we lived in the Panhandle, we would go visit family in Tennessee, and we'd come back down 65, and then we'd have to hit the back roads to get into where we lived, and 231 was one of them. And we'd have to go through a particular part of the Panhandle, and that involved Youngstown, Florida. Now, Youngstown, Florida is blink and you'll miss it. There's not a lot. In fact, if you pull it up on Google Maps, you're going to notice a Dollar General. You're going to notice a motel of no particular variety that has a U-Haul dealer in front of it. In fact, it's the Youngstown Motel. You're going to notice a gas station, a shop, hardware feed, post office, and, a couple roads off 231. But nothing really out of the ordinary, nothing that makes you think anything about this little blink and you'll miss it, just part of the road. But well over 40 years ago, in fact almost 50 at this point, something really bad happened at this particular part of Florida. And it has not been forgotten. In fact, it was pretty bad. And we're going to talk about it today. There was a train that was heading south from Dothan along what is called the Bay Line. So it would be from Atlanta to St. Andrews Bay. It's on a railroad. And it derailed at 2 a.m. So middle of the night. And this part of the Panhandle, nobody's around. And in fact, this is still part of the Panhandle where there's really not a lot going on in this area, because this is still probably a good hour to an hour and a half north of Panama City. So there's still not a ton of people in this area. It's not heavily populated. And even back then, it was probably less populated. So at 2 a.m., it's you and the alligators, maybe some raccoons, a lot of deer, maybe a black bear, but nothing. And this train derailed at 2 a.m. And it happened about a mile north of Youngstown. And it was on February 26th, 1978. And it was bad. 8 people were killed and 88 were injured. Although the NTS, which is the National Transportation Safety Board, so NTSB, actually reported 138 injuries. So it depends on who you want to listen to. But a lot of people got hurt. Unfortunately, 8 people were killed. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that not only did it derail, and not only did people get hurt and people died, but there was also a chemical spill. There was chlorine in one of the cars that derailed, and it ruptured. And if you know anything about chlorine, if you've ever been in a pool and you know that if there's too much chlorine in the pool, first thing you notice is that your eyes start to sting and burns a little bit, and it's just not good. And chlorine gas is deadly. It's heavy. It sucks the oxygen out of everything. Um, it's it kind of settles to the ground. It's a heavier gas, so it doesn't really allow you to breathe. And that was what made this entire thing so much worse. Not that a train derailment isn't already bad, but if bad could go to worse, this is exactly what you'd want to think of at 2 a.m. with no one around. And so it was like a thick fog, they said, and the bottom part of it was like a greenish yellow color. And it was from the ruptured chlorine car, and it was flooding the air. And that actually caused a lot of Northern Bay County to have to evacuate. And one of the police chiefs actually described it as being in a room with hundreds of ammonia and chlorine bottles opened. It knocked you backwards, it cut off your air, it burned your eyes, it gave you a bitter taste in your mouth. That's one of the sheriff's deputies describing that on the scene. He said, but it could have been a lot worse. There was a wind blowing out of the east, and it blew into an area where it wasn't heavily populated, so it just kind of helped it dissipate. Now, one of the people that were actually patrolling in the area, one of the sheriff's deputies, even reported back then that the railroad facility that was in Youngstown was not manned after midnight, so it was very difficult for anyone to call for help. And he said that he was one of the first members to be on the scene. So this is Deputy Sheriff Tommy Laughlin. He was one of the first members on the scene. And he said that he was also one of the first members to go into the chlorine cloud. And he said he had to go back out and come back in and go back out and come back in to try to rescue people. And he was trying to get, people out. And he said he got 6 kids out. And unfortunately, 3 of them ended up dying. And he said, but he could only go in for a certain amount of time before it even got too much for him because he couldn't breathe. And he said that it was awful. He would go in and he would have to come back out. And he said that the worst thing that he saw was, because as the chlorine cloud kind of started to move, it moved across 231. So that's that road that I used to drive down, that you can still drive down to this day. And as this, as they're assessing the fact that not only there's a train derailment, now they have a chlorine spill, and now this cloud is moving across. Cars driving down 231, cars needed oxygen back then to run the way that the engines were set up, and it would go through the car's engine, and it would stall the car. Well, as it would stall the car, people would be confused, and they'd be sitting there, and then the chlorine would go into the car's ventilation system, and before the people would realize what was going on, it would suffocate them to death. And so he said the worst thing he saw was sheriff's deputies would be over there just pulling corpses out of cars, because there'd just be a car sitting there on the road. He said that was awful. He goes, when you go through the cloud of chlorine gas, the engine vehicles would just stop because it would cut off the oxygen supply. And he said that there were so many unintended victims in this because they couldn't get the word out fast enough. And he could hear people yelling in the distance. He could hear people yelling for help in the train. He said that it was awful. And he told his lieutenant, who got on scene finally, he goes, I know it's dangerous, but I got to do something. These people need help. And he also knew that the train engineer was trapped in the midst of the gas. But he said that the train engineer actually was smart when they interviewed him. He knew that there were holes in the field, and he had him, Lofton, the deputy, got to him, and he had him run out in the field and jump in one of those holes, because in the hole there would have been fresh oxygen, and the gas would not have seeped into those holes, and so the air bubble in the hole would have saved his life, and it did. He actually had people jump in these holes in this field, and it saved their life. That is incredible thinking on the part of this sheriff's deputy. to get people to safety however he could if he couldn't get them through this noxious cloud. Which, of course, this was just an absolutely horrible, horrible incident. And of course, this caused the FBI to get involved. It caused so many other people to get involved to have to figure out exactly what had happened. Because when they actually like finally got daylight, and when they finally got everything assessed, and they started to actually interview people a couple days later, when they interviewed the conductor, when the FBI got involved and they actually interviewed the conductor actually said when the train hit, he could tell from the screeching that there was derailment. There was no question about that. But when it hit, it didn't feel right. So when they went back and looked, it looked as if someone had notched the railroad. I don't know how you notch a railroad, but apparently you can notch a railroad, which that just sounds like sabotage to me. And that's crazy. That's crazy that someone would want to go so far as to see a train accident and hurt people. And then, of course, I mean, you never know what a train's carrying. Even to this day, they're not obviously going to put, in this train, there are cars. In this train, there are cows. In this train, there's noxious gas. You know, they don't do that for obvious reasons. But it's, you know, it's crazy to think that somebody probably did that. And that's, you know, that's the scary outcome. You know, one of the deputies reported that he thought he was walking in mud, but he was walking in caustic acid, which actually ate the nails off his shoes. It ate the necklace off his neck. The chlorine glass did. It actually ate the nickel off his pistol. Of course, he said Bayline was nice enough to buy him a new pair of shoes, a necklace, and fix his pistol. I'm supposing that was probably the least they could do. He also found out, Laughlin also found out that he was in gas for more than an hour with a gas mask that only was supposed to protect him for 30 minutes. He was very lucky to be alive, he said. So, yeah. The final total, though, 8 people died, 118 were injured, if you believe the higher count, and 2,500 people were evacuated. Countless livestock, they also found out, died as the gas moved away and dissipated. And of course, everybody was very, very scared. The environmental damage was so bad. The EPA had to get involved. They actually had people out digging ditches to make sure that none of the caustic acid, or because it was supposed, it's Florida, guys. If it rains at any point, because it can rain anytime in Florida, except for apparently right now what we're dealing with, they had to make ditches to ensure that wherever it rained, it wouldn't go into the Bay County water supply, because that would have just been a whole other environmental issue. And the cleanup actually almost took a month in total. It affected so many people in that area. People couldn't get back to their houses. They were evacuated. It was a huge story. FBI, the railroad, the safety people, EPA, local, federal, for weeks afterwards. The federal agents confiscated all the footage they could get. They took pictures of everything. And like they said, they think that the railroad was notched, where the lead rail, where the front wheel, where the engine hit. And of course, that's what they think, that someone sabotaged that to cause a train incident. And the reason that they were so concerned about this is because a couple weeks earlier, there was a chlorine gas spill in Waverly, Tennessee. And so that was too coincidental for the FBI, so the FBI decided that they had to get involved. And of course, after all the investigations, no one was ever actually charged in the Youngstown derailment. But strangely enough, there was another train derailment 2 years prior in the same location in Youngstown, but of course that one wasn't as bad. No one was really hurt. There was obviously no chlorine spill. And it was kind of suspected that the same people were responsible for both. But of course, the 1978 one was way worse. It caused much more destruction due to the deaths and what the train was carrying. And it was actually so bad that a lot of families ended up suing Bayline and their parent company, International Paper. But the lawsuits were actually settled outside just as a jury was selected. Which, I mean, I'm sure the jury would have sided with the people and way more. But yeah, so if you've ever driven down 231 and you've gone through the blip of town of Youngstown, didn't even realize it, that's unfortunately where something horrible, horrible happened on that night in February of 1978. And if you're like me, you wouldn't have thought anything about it. It's really hard to think that someone probably just wanted to see a train wreck and ended up ruining so many people's lives. Like, why? Why do you have to do that? Go watch a movie. Don't do that to people. But yeah, the next time you're driving to Panama City and you're on the back roads, you drive through Youngstown, just, just check it out or stop and think about it for a second. Yeah. So, Panhandle is full of interesting surprises, guys. But you know what? I'm sure that those people that did cause that train derailment probably went on to be Florida men. Because they just seem like those kind of assholes. I said it. And, today's Florida man, like we didn't just already talk about him, this one also kind of takes it to the next level. This Florida man decided to take drunk driving to the next level on a Segway. Props to you for, first of all, being on a Segway and then drinking on a Segway. He actually made quite the scene when police spotted him swerving into oncoming traffic outside the Polk County Sheriff's Office. So not only were you on a Segway, drunk on a Segway, you just decided to take yourself to them. Apparently he smelled heavy of wine on his breath, admitted to drinking nearly 2 bottles, and he was reportedly 3 times over the legal limit. Officers had to redirect cars to avoid colliding with the rogue Segway, while the Florida man struggled through a sobriety test. Explained he got tired fast due to his pacemaker. While Segways may seem harmless, Florida law treats them as actual motor vehicles, which means that DUI charges did apply. After a quick detour to the sheriff's office, he posted a $1,000 bond, likely leaving his Segway and dignity behind. So even on 2 wheels, you can still get a DUI. So, don't drink and Segway. Also, leave trains alone. Hope you guys enjoyed, well, maybe not enjoyed hearing that one, but thanks for listening to this episode, guys. Don't forget to check out Unfiltered Studios if you're looking for a new podcast to check out. There are some amazing people over there. We're always adding new podcasts. In fact, we just got 2 new people to the family, so definitely check out those. Don't forget to check out social medias for That Florida Feeling. You guys are awesome. I love the memes and stuff that you guys send me. Always happy to post those. If you do have a suggestion for an episode, you can either email me at thatfloridafeel@gmail.com or, just say hi on one of the many posts on either TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now, whatever. One of those many things, guys. I love hearing from you guys. It's actually awesome. I've made so many friends from this podcast, and I'm thankful for each and every one of you as my listeners and as my friends. I hope everybody has a great week. Don't forget to drink your water, wear your sunscreen, and as always, guys, that's your daily dose of sunshine.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.